Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Mrs. Jeffries Questions the Answer by Emily Brightwell, narrated by Lindy Nettleton. Chapter 1. Hannah Cameron smiled slyly as she stepped into the darkened room. Good, she thought, it's black as sin in here. No one would be able to see a thing. That should make the surprise even better. Hannah patted the pocket of her emerald green velvet gown, making sure the box of matches was still secure on her person. It wouldn't do to let a small detail like forgetting the matches cause her to ruin the plan. No, she'd waited too long for this night, planned too hard to let it go awry now. Moving cautiously, she edged further into the darkness toward the French doors on the opposite side. Her heart pounded, and her dress rustled loudly when it brushed against the settee as she eased past. She stopped, turned, and looked toward the closed door through which she'd just come. It wouldn't do for one of the servants to come snooping about now, not when she was so close to achieving her goal. But she heard nothing. Most of the servants should be fast asleep. That was one of the reasons the little tart felt so safe. The silly minx didn't realize anyone was onto her tricks. But by heaven, she'd find out differently tonight. Her eyes adjusted to the darkness, and through the faint light filtering in from the balcony, she could see the outline of the lamp she'd carefully placed on the table. Next to the table was the balloon-backed chair she'd put there earlier that evening. She wanted to be comfortable while she waited. Who knew what time the little tramp would actually come home? Reaching into her pocket again, she pulled the matches out and set them down next to the lamp. Then, wanting to be certain that everything was going according to schedule, she went to the French doors and peered out into the night. Across the garden, she could see the faint glow of a gas lamp rising above the high walls. She squinted, trying to see if the lock was still disengaged as it had been earlier, but there wasn't enough light to see. She had to be sure. Holding her breath, she eased the door open and shut it again. The door made the faintest of noises in the quiet house, but she was satisfied. It was still unlocked. She giggled softly, and then her laughter died abruptly as she heard a faint creak. She whirled around and peered through the blackness to the door leading to the hall. No sign of light there, so it must still be closed, she thought. But Hannah wasn't taking any chances. She glanced to her left, squinting hard to make sure the only other door in the small sitting room, a door that led to a rarely used guest room, was still closed. Nothing there either. Hannah shrugged, decided the creak she heard must have been the house settling, and turned back toward the window to continue her vigil. She concentrated on staring out into the garden, watching the shadows and wondering when her quarry would arrive. The thick carpet masked the sound of the footsteps creeping up behind her. Suddenly, she gasped and made a strangling noise deep in her throat, but the knife that had been plunged into her back had struck true and deep. Her heart stopped pumping. In an agony of pain, she couldn't find the breath to scream for help. She wheezed and choked, her hands flailing wildly in the air until finally her knees buckled and she collapsed upon the floor. Hannah Cameron wouldn't be surprising anyone tonight. "I tell you, it's just not convenient now," Mrs. Goodge grumbled. The cook nodded her grey head emphatically, pushed her spectacles back up her nose, and gazed round the table at the rest of the household of Upper Edmonton Gardens, home of Inspector Gerald Witherspoon of Scotland Yard. "But, Mrs. Goodge," Mrs. Jeffries, the housekeeper, said softly, "I don't think you've any choice in the matter. Your Aunt Alberta will be here tomorrow." She was a plump, kindly-looking woman with dark auburn hair, liberally sprinkled with grey at the temples, intelligent brown eyes, and a fair complexion that contrasted nicely with the bronze-coloured bombazine dress she wore. "I could send her a telegram tonight," Mrs. Goodge said quickly. She glanced at the clock. "Wiggins here could nip out and get one off." "That might hurt the lady's feelings," Wiggins the footman pointed out. "She's already done her packing and all. Not that I mind going out for you, I don't. But you told us a fortnight ago she'd be coming." The footman was a sturdy young man of 19, with dark hair, blue eyes, and round apple cheeks that blushed easily. "Why don't you want her to come and visit?" Betsy, the pretty blonde-haired maid, asked. "The inspector's already said he doesn't mind. There's plenty of room in the house for her." Smythe, the black-haired coachman, crossed his arms over his massive chest. His brown eyes twinkled with amusement. His features were heavy, almost brutal-looking, belying an easy-going nature and a kind heart. "What's all the fuss, Mrs. Goodge? I thought you liked your old auntie." "I do like her," the cook shot back. "But it's just not convenient for her to come visiting now. We've got that dinner party for the inspector coming up. We've got... She broke off, for in truth, except for one dinner party a few weeks hence, there was nothing else of any importance coming up for the household. Inspector Witherspoon, one of Scotland Yard's most foremost detectives, was an exceptionally easy employer. Having not been born with a silver spoon in his mouth, he didn't expect his cook to cater to his every culinary whim. "We've got plenty on our plates right now," she finished lamely. "Besides, we might get us another murder, and then where would I be? Hamstrung." She nodded vigorously. "That's what I'd be. I can't have my sauces in and out of this kitchen with a gossiping old woman under my feet, now can I?" Mrs. Jeffries sighed inwardly. The cook had a point, but as they didn't have a murder to investigate, it was rather a weak argument. "But, Mrs. Goodge," she pointed out, "we don't have anything to investigate right at the moment." "More's the pity," Mrs. Goodge snapped impatiently. "But that doesn't mean we won't get one, does it? If you don't mind my saying so, I don't want to have to miss another one because of my auntie. A woman her age shouldn't be out gallivanting all over the place anyway. She should be safely home." "So that's it, then," Smythe laughed. "You're afraid that dear old Auntie Alberta'll diddle out of a murder." "It wouldn't be the first time," the cook replied darkly. "But, Mrs. Goodge," Mrs. Jeffries said kindly, "it wasn't your aunt's fault she became ill." "Never said it was," Mrs. Goodge set her chin stubbornly. "But the fact is, I'm one murder short on the lot of you, and it isn't fair. If I hadn't had to go off to see her last year, I'd not have missed that Barrett murder. She only had a touch of bronchitis, and here she had me dashing about thinking she was at death's door and causing me to miss my fair share of the investigating. Well, I'll not be taking a risk like that again. I've got a feeling in my bones that sure as rice needs water, the minute Alberta shows up on our doorstep, we'll have us a fine murder." "But saying we do get us one," Wiggins thought he ought to add his opinion to the discussion, "why would it matter if she was here or not? You'd still be able to do your part." The cook snorted derisively. "With Alberta hanging about and putting her oar in every time I was entertaining one of my sauces, you must be daft, boy." The cook had a veritable army of sauces trooping through her kitchen. Chimney sweeps, costermongers, laundrymen, street urchins, bakers' boys, delivery men, and even the men from the gasworks, if necessary. She plied them with hot tea, sticky buns, Madeira cake, and trifle, while pumping them ruthlessly for every single morsel of gossip to be had. Her help on the inspector's previous cases had been important, and on several occasions it had been a tidbit of gossip she'd learned that had been paramount in solving the case. She was most proud of her contribution to the cause of justice. Despite the fact that she never left the kitchen, the cook knew everything there was to know about everyone who was anybody in the City of London. "I'm afraid you've left it a bit late," Mrs. Jeffries said kindly. "Even if Wiggins goes out tonight to the telegraph office, I doubt a message would reach your aunt before she left in the morning. You did say she lives quite a ways out in the country." Mrs. Goodge thought about it for a moment and then gave a sigh of defeat. "Oh, bother. You're right. Besides, Alberta would just ignore it anyway. But it's inconvenient, her coming now, ruddy inconvenient." Mrs. Jeffries understood why the cook was so upset. But there was nothing they could do about it. "It'll all work out," she said cheerfully. "Besides, if she doesn't come tomorrow, Inspector Witherspoon will be most disappointed. He's so looking forward to meeting her." She could think of no other household in the city in which an employer not only allowed but positively delighted in the staff's relatives coming to visit. But then again, Gerald Witherspoon was an exceptional man. He'd not been born to wealth. He'd acquired a fortune and this huge house when his Aunt Euphemia had died. He'd also acquired Smythe and Wiggins at the same time. Mrs. Jeffries, Mrs. Goodge, and Betsy had been later additions. They were all devoted to the inspector, and they were equally devoted to his cases, murder investigations. Not that he knew about their efforts on his behalf. That would never do. But they contributed greatly to his success. As a matter of fact, Mrs. Jeffries thought smugly, if it hadn't been for them, Inspector Witherspoon would still be a clerk in the records room at Scotland Yard and not one of its best homicide detectives. "Has the inspector decided who he wants to invite to his dinner party?" Betsy asked. Mrs. Jeffries frowned. "Yes, I'm afraid it's worse than we feared." There was a collective groan around the table. "She's really coming, then?" Smythe asked. The housekeeper nodded. "Unfortunately, yes. She's going to be in London buying her trousseau." "You mean that man's really going to marry her?" Wiggins asked incredulously. "As far as I know, yes," Mrs. Jeffries replied. "Otherwise she wouldn't be coming to London. Since she is going to be in the city, the inspector can hardly ignore her." "But that's not fair," Wiggins yelped. "Isn't this blooming party supposed to be for Lady Canonbury?" "Well, yes," Mrs. Jeffries said quickly. "She is the guest of honour." Lady Canonbury was their neighbour, the widow of a peer, and a thoroughly delightful friend to all of them. She was also a bit of a political radical, an enthusiastic helper on some of their investigations, and very, very enamoured of their dear employer. "I'm sure she'll not mind in the least that the inspector's cousin is invited as well." "But she's only coming for the dinner party, right?" Smythe asked anxiously. "She's not staying?" "She's not staying," Mrs. Jeffries assured him. "We'll only have to put up with the woman for a couple of hours." She deliberately didn't tell them who else would be on the guest list for the evening. It would only depress them. Gracious, When Inspector Witherspoon asked her to send out that particular invitation, she'd been sorely tempted to rip it to shreds rather than pop it in the postbox. But good sense and integrity had prevailed against her personal prejudices, and so she'd invited the odious man. But there was no need to share that information yet. "And it's only for a dinner party. We probably won't see her at all, except when we're serving. I hardly think she'll be coming down to the kitchen for a chat." Betsy giggled. "I can't wait to see Lucy's face when she hears. Maybe we ought to seat them next to each other."
"Oh, no, lass," Smythe said. "That's not fair. That's no way to treat a friend. To be honest, I'd not stick Miss Edwina Livingston Graves on my worst enemy." "This isn't a toss," Chief Inspector Jonathan Barrows said quietly to the constable standing at his elbow. "This is a murder. Cold-blooded, premeditated murder."
"Yes, sir." The constable, a young man who'd only been on the force 2 months, replied quickly. He glanced around the room and wondered what the chief saw that he didn't. It sure looked as if the place had been burgled to him. There was a broken pane of glass in the window of the French door. Looked to him like that was how the thief had gotten into the house. But he wasn't about to argue with the chief inspector. No, sir, not him. He knew what was what. Frowning, he stared through the open bedroom door on the other side of the room. The top drawers in the dresser were open and bits of clothing were sticking out. A silver hairbrush and a bottle of scent were lying on the carpet amidst the tangle of the lace runner, and a lamp had been knocked over. He shook his head. Looked like a toss to him. He glanced quickly at the woman crumpled on the floor. She had a knife sticking out of her back. Seemed to Constable Jessie Sayers the poor lady had had the bad luck to walk in on a thief. Barrows looked down at the body and grimaced. "Stabbed," he grunted sympathetically. "Not a nice way to die, but hopefully it was quick." Constable Sayers cleared his throat. Sir? P.C. Meadows has already sent for Inspector Nivens. He should be here any minute now." Barrow's mouth tightened. He didn't like Inspector Nivens. Few people did. But in all fairness, he didn't blame P.C. Meadows for sending for him. Nivens was a good enough man when it came to burglaries, but he knew sod all about murder.
"He'll not be any use to us, will he? I don't want him mucking up the evidence until Witherspoon sees it."
Barrows, who normally would have been at home with his feet up and reading a good book instead of standing over a corpse, had just attended a dinner party next door to the Cameron house when the alarm was raised. He and Mrs. Barrows had just come out to hail a hansom when they'd heard the Cameron butler shouting for the constable from up at the corner. He'd put Mrs. Barrows into a hansom and taken charge.
"I assure you, sir," a harsh voice said from the doorway, "I am properly trained enough not to muck up the evidence." Barrows whirled around. "Nivens, sorry, I didn't know you were there. But this isn't really your bailiwick." "I understood there'd been a murder and robbery here," Nivens said, stepping farther into the room. He nodded toward the body. "Is that the victim?" Barrows sighed. That was the sort of question he expected from Nivens. Never could stick the man. Too much of a bootlicker to the politicians he was. "Of course it's the victim. Not many people nap on their sitting-room floors with knives sticking out of their backs."
Nivens ignored the sarcasm and walked toward the bedroom.
"The place has been tossed," he commented. "No, it hasn't," Barrows said testily. Much as he disliked Inspector Nivens, he'd best be careful. All that bootlicking had paid off. Nivens had powerful friends. "Someone's tried to make it look like a toss, But if a pro did that," he jerked his chin toward the tall boys, "I'll eat my hat." "Not every toss is done by a pro." Nivens gave his superior a thin smile. "Did I hear you say you were calling Inspector Witherspoon in for this one?" "I am," he replied firmly. Nivens might be right, but Barrows didn't think it likely. "I know full well that not all burglaries are done by pros, but someone went to a great deal of trouble to convince us that this one was. This isn't a burglary gone bad, it's murder." He nodded toward the victim. "Someone wanted that woman dead." "Are you absolutely certain of that?" Nivens asked. Barrows hesitated. In his heart he knew he was right. He could smell a sham when he was standing in it. But he'd worked himself up from the ranks with good, honest police work, and he wasn't a fool. Anyone with half a brain could tell that Nivens wanted this case. Scotland Yard was as riddled with politics and pressure as any department in Whitehall. Much as he disliked Nivens, he couldn't honestly say with 100% certainty that this wasn't a burglary. Blasted inconvenient that one of the police constables had taken it upon himself to send for Nivens. "Well, it certainly looks that way to me, and I have had a number of years of experience." Nivens said nothing. He walked over to stand in the doorway between the two rooms, his gaze darting back and forth between them. "No professional would do the drawers like that," he admitted, "and there's plenty of valuables about that should have been grabbed first, but I don't think you can state with any absolute certainty that this is simply a case of murder." Barrows said nothing. "In which case," Nivens continued, "I'd venture to say that I'm far more experienced in this kind of case than Inspector Witherspoon is." He walked across the room and knelt down by the body. Barrows watched him for a moment. Scotland Yard was organized quite rigidly, at least on paper. If he was really following regulations, he'd have called in whatever inspector was on duty and assigned to this district. But no organization was independent of politics or the latest headlines in the Times. The police were under constant pressure to solve crimes quickly, efficiently, and with some assurance of actually catching the real culprits, especially now. So, organization or not, every chief inspector had his own way of making sure he got his fair share of collars. It was common knowledge that when a good copper was needed to sort out a burglary, Nivens, sod that he was the one who got it. By the same token, if one wanted a killer caught, the odds were that Gerald Witherspoon would catch the killer. And Barrows wanted a killer caught, but he didn't dare step too hard on Nivens's toes. "You're right," Barrows grinned. "Oh, by the way, I shouldn't touch that body if I were you." Surprised, Nivens looked up. "Why ever not?" "Because I want Witherspoon to examine the victim." Nivens's eyes narrowed angrily, but Barrows continued before he could protest. "I've decided to have you both on this one." Nivens's jaw dropped. "That's highly irregular, sir." "Of course it is," Barrows said cheerfully, "but after the beating the force has taken over this wretched Ripper case, I'm not going to risk someone else getting away with murder." He turned to Constable Sayers. "Get a lad over to Witherspoon straight away. Tell him to get here quickly. He and Inspector Nivens will be working together on this one." "It ought to be a fine day tomorrow," Smythe ventured softly. Betsy looked up from the apron she was mending and smiled. Smythe was staring over her shoulder, at a spot on the far wall rather than at her. She knew what that meant. The poor man was working up the courage to ask her to go out with him again. She thought it was sweet the way the cocky, sometimes arrogant coachman could be as shy as a schoolboy. "Should be nice," she commented.
putting the last stitch through the stiff cotton. "But it'll be cold."
"True," he said quickly. "But it's going to be sunny." He cleared his throat. "I'm taking bow and arrow for a good run tomorrow with the carriage, and seeing as it's your day out, I was wondering if you'd like to come along."
"I would," Wiggins volunteered from the doorway. Blissfully unaware of the scowl the coachman directed toward him, Wiggins and Fred, the household's mongrel dog, advanced into the warm, cosy kitchen. "I've not been out in ages. Where are we going, then?" Betsy stifled a grin as she caught a quick peek at the thunderous expression on Smythe's face. "We're not going anywhere," she said tartly, taking pity on the coachman. "It's my day out, remember, not yours. You've got to be here to help Mrs. Goodge get her Aunt Alberta settled in." Wiggins opened his mouth to protest, but just then Mrs. Goodge, a brown bottle in her hand, came bustling through the kitchen door. "This ruddy cap's stuck again," she cried, charging towards Smythe and thrusting the bottle under his nose. "See if you can get it unstuck. I don't know why they make them like that, silly bottle makers. Don't they know that people with rheumatism in their joints can't undo those wretched tops? If we could, we wouldn't need the ruddy stuff in the first place." Smythe, wondering if ever he'd get a chance to be alone with Betsy, took the bottle, gave the top a fast, hard twist, and when he felt it give, handed it back to the cook.
"There you are, Mrs. Goodge, all nice and open for you. A good night's sleep and a bit of this on your hands, and you'll be as right as rain tomorrow."
"Is your rheumatism bothering you again?" Mrs. Jeffries asked as she too stepped into the kitchen. "Blimey," thought Smythe, "it's a ruddy train station in here. Doesn't this lot ever go to sleep? Blasted inconvenient it was, never having a moment to be alone with the lass."
"It's been acting up a bit." Mrs. Goodge plopped down in the chair next to Betsy.
Wiggins sat down next to her. Smythe sighed inwardly. Maybe they'd all go to bed soon. "Can we have some cocoa?" Wiggins asked. Smythe shot the footman a savage frown, but Wiggins didn't see it. He was too busy scratching Fred's ears.
"It's getting kind of late," Smythe said quickly, "and with Mrs. Goodge's hands acting up, I don't think we ought to be bothering her with making an hot drink."
"Oh, I'll make it," Mrs. Jeffries said airily as she bustled toward the wet larder in the hall. "I've nothing else to do. The inspector's gone up already." She broke off and cocked her head, listening. From outside the kitchen window, the sound of heavy footsteps running up the stairs to the front door could be heard. A second later, they all heard the loud banging of the knocker. "I wonder who that could be." Mrs. Jeffries started for the stairs. But as fast as she was, Smythe headed her off.
"I'll go up and see who it is," he said. "It's too late for you to be opening that front door without knowing who's doing the knocking."
Together they went up and started down the hall. Inspector Witherspoon, dressed in only his trousers and an unbuttoned white shirt, was just reaching the handle.
"Let me, sir,"
Smythe called, charging past the housekeeper and making a mad dash for the front door. Blimey, didn't these two realize it weren't safe to be opening that bloomin' door at this time of night? "Oh, that's all right," Witherspoon replied. He slapped the latch back and turned the key. "I am, after all, a policeman."
"But, sir—"
Smythe leapt toward the front door just as the inspector pulled it open. He elbowed his employer to one side and planted his big body directly in front of him.
"That's what I'm afraid of, sir. You've put enough killers away to have plenty of enemies out there."
Excuse me." Constable Sayers blinked at the sight of the huge, burly man standing like a mountain on the other side of the door. "But is this the home of Inspector Gerald Witherspoon?"
"It is," Smythe replied as he eased to his left, "and I take it you want to see him."
"It's a police constable, Smythe," Witherspoon said cheerfully. "I do believe it's quite safe to let him in." "Sorry to bother you, sir," Constable.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?